favorite, I'm told, is a course on aesthetic gastronomy. Or more of that. And then some of you have read House of My Name, the Lighthouse book. Pastor Appel's done a companion study book. Oh, you should pick that up for class. That's a good study guide material. And he and his wife Sarah have 7 children. Mary is here with us, and he's got a new little one, Isla Pearl, about a month ago?
Yes, 1 month.
1 month, and they're doing well, I guess. Very good. Well, folks, thanks for having us. I just asked to talk to youth. So, he has free reign to whatever he's going to talk to you about today. Welcome, Pastor Appel.
Well, good morning to you all. It's good to see you. Pleasure to be here. Mary and I have really enjoyed traveling across the United States to come out to speak with you. You have very different weather than we do, although I think the cold weather was just to welcome us so that we felt at home. We have cold weather in Idaho, as you can imagine. When I was in Florida doing my graduate work, when I was at seminary, I would tell people that I lived in Idaho, and they would look at me with that kind of squinty look on their face, like, I feel like that's somewhere far away. And they would often ask me if they would assume that I meant Iowa. And so, in Idaho, we have this bumper stickers that say, the other Iowa. Because people think we live in Iowa. So anyway, it's a long distance, and we've really enjoyed coming here. Thank you for your welcoming us to be here. I'm looking forward to speaking to probably a lot of your parents and others tonight at the dinner. But I wanted to talk with you a little bit this morning about, I thought we would have, when I was thinking about what I could talk to you about, I thought it would be fun to talk to you about some of the things that I have taught over the many years at New St. Andrews College. I have taught freshman theology of the 16 years that I taught at NSA. I have taught at NSA. I have taught that class for about 13 of those years. So I thought it would be fun to talk about some of that. I also teach a class on food, which Mr. Lang mentioned, a class on the history and culture and sociology and philosophy and theology of food. It's called gastronomy. And that's going to work its way in. All of my students, when I've talked to them and teach theology, I just can't keep food out of the class. Food always comes in. I like food a lot, as I'm sure you do as well, and I was very excited about coming to the South just so that I could go find myself a shrimp po' boy, which I plan to do either today or tomorrow. So food will come into it. We just can't help but do. But what I want to talk about today is I want to give you a brief history of the world. What do you think about that? Are you up for that? Think that's good? I want to do a brief history of the world, but I want to summarize it in 3 different thinkers. Okay, so a history of the world, a history of the thought of the Western tradition, in 3 thinkers, just 3 people, would give you sort of bookmarks to help you understand where our particular culture is and where it's come from. So, you ready for the journey? Let's go together. It's going to be fun. The first thinker I want to tell you about is Augustine. How many of you have ever heard of Augustine? Of course you have. How many of you read Augustine? Okay, good, excellent. So you will know that Augustine, perhaps you know this, Augustine is famous for a particular saying that he came up with, which was a kind of credo, a way of summarizing his particular way of understanding the world. And Augustine said, credo ut intelligam. How many of you know enough Latin to be able to translate that? Credo ut intelligam. Have you ever heard that saying before? Heard it? Okay. How many of you know what it means? Yes, go ahead. Believe that you may understand. Good. That's a great, just straightforward translation of the Latin there. Augustine said I believe in order that I might understand. I want you to think very carefully about that, what that means. I believe in order that I might understand. Who wants to take a shot at explaining what that means? You don't have to know what Augustine meant, but just thinking about the statement itself. What do you think Augustine meant by that? Go ahead. What's your name?
I'm Gloria.
Gloria?
Augustine's saying, believes in God, and so therefore he can understand all things that God made.
Okay, yes, so he believes in God, and therefore he can understand all things that God made. Is that a summary of what you just said? Good, good. Anyone else? Expand upon that? Say anything more? What Gloria got absolutely right is that Augustine absolutely believed that in order to understand, something had to be believed in. That's why faith first, right? I believe in order that I might understand. Now, the first thing I think that's interesting to note about the way Augustine understands the world is that if you believe in something, the thing that you believe in is not something that you made, is it? No. In fact, this is, I think, the most significant part of what Augustine means by this wonderful little phrase that encapsulates his whole way of knowing, and not just his, but a whole way of ancient knowing about the world. I believe in order that I might understand. The belief part is so essential because what it says is, if I'm going to make sense of all the things that are, I have to receive it first as a gift. And if I'm given a gift, I have to be willing to receive it and then to study it, to believe in what has been given to me, so that I can come to the place where I understand the thing that I have been given. What Augustine is saying is that creation, the world, is like a Christmas present. It's a gift given by one who designed it and made it because he didn't do it. Augustine didn't do that. One of my favorite things about the story of creation is that man was made on which day? Day 6, right? So that means there was 5 full days of God doing all kinds of crazy, awesome things, spreading out the canopy of heaven and filling it with birds and the seas and fish, and all of those crazy creatures that dwell down in the deep part of the sea that no one ever sees. Before man was ever around to see any of it. And so when man was created on day 6, there was an entire universe of things that God had made that delighted God and was given as a gift to Adam to delight him. Everything from lionfish, you know what I'm talking about, with the great spines, to pears and apples, to green valleys and mountaintops, rain, colors. Think about all the things that God made. He could have made a monochrome world. He could have made a world with only one flavor. Wouldn't that be boring? So, y'all should know, that about a month ago I got COVID. And as many people who have had COVID, I lost my sense of taste and smell. I've never lost my sense of taste and smell before. And it was a good thing for someone who teaches gastronomy to go through that experience of having lost it. You know, the funny thing was, every night I would get excited about eating dinner, and I would forget that I couldn't taste anything. And then I would sit down at the table to whatever it was that my wife had prepared. It was wonderful. I was been thinking about it, and I put the first bite in my mouth, and it came flooding back on me that I could not taste anything. And you know, the thing that really surprised me about that experience is that I quickly lost interest in food. I remember eating a fantastic fried chicken sandwich that when I know what the sandwich tastes like, and it's fantastic when I had taste, but when I didn't have any taste, I lost interest halfway through the sandwich. I couldn't even finish it. I got tired of chewing. Turns out being hungry is not enough to really make you want to eat very much. I think there'd be a lot less of me if I didn't have a sense of taste, because I wouldn't eat as much. We eat not just because we need food to nourish our bodies, we eat because it's amazing. One more bite. That's the way the Lord made the world. And he gave it as a gift to Augustine. So when Augustine said credo ut intelligam, one of the things that he meant by that, which is so central, is that creation was made, lavishly planned by the Lord, and given to man before man ever was around. Much like when you were born into your family. You didn't decide who your mother and father were. You didn't decide who your brothers or sisters were. You didn't decide where you lived in the country, whether you're going to be a Southerner or a Northerner or an American versus an Englishman. It's all given to you by the Lord. That's what Augustine meant first. But an implication of this fact that God gives a world is this: that creation itself reveals that it was made on purpose by someone who knew what he was doing. He designed the world when he gave it to Adam as a gift. It wasn't a blank slate. It wasn't a bunch of Play-Doh that Adam was enjoined to design for himself. It was given with purpose. And that's why I find it so interesting. One of my favorite verses in the creation story, besides the fact that Adam comes on day 6, is that when the garden is made for Adam and Adam is put in the garden, one of the things in Genesis 2:15 that we're told is that Adam's responsibility, his first responsibility, was to cultivate and keep the garden. What does it mean to cultivate something? How many of you have gardens? Maybe not you, but your parents have gardens. Grow things down here in Louisiana? I know you do. Yes, sir. Go ahead. What's your name? Yes. London. What does it mean to cultivate? I want you to think very carefully about what you just said. You said to work with, right? So is cultivation doing what you want to do? Why? What's the difference? Okay. True. Very true. So there's that element of it. But what about the thing that you're cultivating? What's that? The earth. Yes, the earth. Or in your case, a garden. Suppose you planted peas or corn or tomatoes. Can you treat them all the same? What will happen if you do? Some of them will die. And they'll die because you did not cultivate them. So what is essential if you're going to be a good gardener? What do you have to do? Yes. You have to pay attention to what you're given. And it turns out that tomatoes and peas and corn are not the same thing, right? So one of the things that was implicated within the command that Adam was given to work on the earth was that he had to pay attention. He had not just to receive the gift, but he had to study it and understand it so that he could be a good husbandman to the earth, a cultivator of the earth, so that the things that he cared for would actually flourish under his stewardship. Does that make sense? But that also implies that it's possible to know what a pea is and what a tomato is and what it needs, and then to be able to work with the grain of creation. So one of the things that Adam is doing, he's not creating things out of nothing like God did. He's receiving things that God made and learning how to be a good steward of those things so they grow up into glorious maturity. Does that make sense? Do you see that? Finally, with Augustine, the fact that God made a world with purpose shows that man has to fit into that world. He discovers his purpose by paying attention to the world that is around him. Just as you are born into a family and part of your responsibility, you didn't come into the world saying, okay, everybody, I'm in control now. Mom and dad, brother and sister, you're all going to do what I say now. That's not the way we were born. We're born into a family and we learn what are our responsibilities, where is our place in the family by paying attention to the structures that surround us, because those structures have meaning. If a man barges into a garden and says, okay, that's it, I'm in charge now and I'm going to do whatever I want and I am going to get me some tomatoes, chances are it's not going to go well, because he's not paying attention to the constraints of the world that surround him. He doesn't understand his place and his purpose within the purposes that surround him. Creation reveals what we are to become. And of course, this means partly, and I know you have Mr. Jared Ritchie as an instructor and a teacher here, it means that beauty is something that isn't just in the eye of the beholder. Do you know what I mean when I say that? Our world is full of understanding of beauty that completely robs beauty of its beauty, which is that beauty is the same as just what I like. What's the difference between beauty and saying it's what I like? Think about it for a minute. Go ahead.
What you like may not be beauty?
Very good. Right, because if it's defined, beauty is defined by whatever I like.
Subjective and objective.
Yes, very good. What's the difference?
Subjective is what you think, your opinion, and objective is the fact.
Right, exactly right, right? And one of the things that I love about the doctrine of creation is that it's possible for me to be wrong. I can say something is beautiful, and I can be wrong. I can say something is no good. I don't like it, and it can still be good. Have you ever had that happen before? Can I tell you this? I had a great struggle, culinary struggle, with olives. I think it was because when my mother was pregnant with me, carried me in her womb, she craved olives, and she ate them by the jarful and even drank the brine. I think I got pickled in olives when I was a little baby. So I never liked olives. They were terrible. I didn't like any form of them. Briny and salty, you know what they taste like, right? I didn't matter, the green ones, the black ones, they're all the same to me. They did not make an impression that was good. But one of the things you learn as you study Western history is that the olive, and indeed olive oil, is the foundation, in many ways, of Western cuisine. The Greeks loved olive oil, the Italians do, and it's been going since then. One of the interesting things, just on a side note about olives, do you know that you can't eat olives right off the tree? Pick an olive off a tree and you put it in your mouth, you will spit it out very fast because it's full of a bitter phenolic compound that it makes them completely unpalatable and unedible. It's why animals don't eat them. So if you're going to eat olives, guess what you have to do? What do you have to do? Who said that? You say pickle them? Yeah. Well, it's partly true. You have to wash them in a chemical compound so that the phenolic bitterness gets out of the olive so that you can actually eat them or press them. But isn't that interesting that we figured out very early on that olives, which naturally, if you put them in your mouth, are terrible, you spit them out, you have to be a little more persistent. You got to wash them. Wash all the bitterness out. Then you can use them. Anyway, I did not like olives. But guess what? I knew that the fault was with me. I'd go by the grocery store and see those beautiful olive bars with the 15, 20 different kinds of olives and look at it longingly, wishing, I wish I could like those. So every year I would try. I would eat olives. And every year, I didn't like them. Until one year. I still remember the day. It was Christmas time. Someone had given us a jar of olive tapenade for Christmas that's like ground up olives. And a baguette. We come home for church, and I was hungry. And we decided to have the baguette and the olive tapenade. At least I knew everyone else would eat it. I probably wouldn't. We had it, and I spread some olive tapenade on that baguette, and I took a bite, and the heavens opened, and the angels sang. And suddenly, the world, the mysterious world of olives that I was excluded from for so long, all of a sudden I was standing in the middle of it singing hallelujah. And I knew why the Lord had made olives and why he pronounced them tov, right? Good at the beginning. See, the point of that whole story, though, is that I was changed. My tastes were changed. I grew up. Now, if we are to understand why this is not so much the case in our time anymore, we have to move on to Augustine. Augustine understood that the world was a gift, that it was given by the Lord, and it was given with meaning. And man's purpose was to find his place in the world that God had made, in the meaning that surrounded him. He was to learn to develop his sense of taste, to be able to understand how great the Lord was. The Lord made great things, and the Lord made lesser things. And it's our job to cultivate our tastes so that we understand them and appreciate them for what they are. Father Capon, one of my favorite authors, said it this way: man's real work is to look at the things of the world and to love them for what they are. Because that is what God does. And man was not made in God's image for nothing. To look at the things in the world and to love them for what they are. So where did it all go wrong? Well, I want you to know that I'm vastly oversimplifying the story. I mean, if I'm going to tell you a story in history of the world in three thinkers, I've got to do some simplifying, right? The second thinker I want you to think about is a man by the name of René Descartes. How many of you ever heard of René Descartes? How many of you have ever read any of his writings? Okay. René Descartes also had an aphoristic saying that was much like Augustine, but it's a very different saying. You probably have heard of it. Yes. In the Latin, of course, cogito ergo sum, right? I think, therefore I am. Okay, so what was Augustine's? Credo ut intelligam. What does it mean? I believe in order that I might understand. Now, Descartes comes and says it this way: I think, therefore I am. First of all, What's the difference, do you think? Don't feel afraid of getting it wrong. It's totally fine to just say what you think.
More subjective to the person.
In what way?
Well, in Augustine's, he's believing, and he's believing in God before he can understand something, and this one is all on the person.
Right, so at the heart of that saying is, I think. It's me, the thinking thing, that establishes that I am, that I have existence. Now, I'm not going to go into the fullness of Descartes' theory of knowledge and how that all works, but I just want you to recognize that this is the shift that happens at the Enlightenment. Instead of the world being the place that's full of the raucous meaning that we just talked about, the Enlightenment said, following Descartes and Kant and others, that the meaning is found not in the world external to me out there given as a gift, but rather in my understanding of the world. I think, and I understand, and therefore I know that I am, and I know that the world is. So it puts the weight of knowing not on the world into which a person is thrust at his birth, but it puts it on the one who knows, not on the object of knowing, but on the subject, the one who knows. Why do you think Descartes wanted to do that? Why do you think that shift is attractive? I think, by way just of editorial comment, I think it's sometimes very important when you're trying to understand false philosophy, to understand what is attractive about it. Because we all know that Satan tempts people by making things attractive. I think it's a huge mistake to think of the devil as a man in a red suit with a pitchfork and horns. The Bible says that he's an angel of light. If he's an angel of light, he comes to make things attractive. The thing you have to get out of your mind is that the great evils of the world, like Auschwitz, are perpetrated not by people believing that they're doing something wrong. What are they doing? Do you think the people that killed millions of Jews thought that they were doing something terribly dark and evil? You're shaking your head. What do you think they thought they were doing? Yes. Turns out that you can only do really, really evil things when you think you're doing right. You have to get that inside your heart and mind, or you will be a sitting duck for evil. Evil never comes packaged up saying, this is really bad. It always comes appealing to, this is great, glorious, amazing, the right thing, you must do it. Okay? So, what's attractive about Descartes' saying? What do you think? I think, therefore I am. What's the attraction of making meaning dependent on the person who knows, not on the world external to the knower? Yes, what's your name? Oh, Cameron, of course. Sorry, I didn't recognize you there. Go ahead, Cameron.
I think it's making themselves
Independent of God? What's the attraction of that?
They just need to trust themselves.
It's sort of the attraction of the garden and what Satan offered in the garden, right? Has God really said? God knows that the day you eat of it, you will be like him. You know that, don't you? He's trying to keep you from being like him. So if you eat, you will be like him, and then you will be like it. When you're like him, you'll know what he knows. And then you'll be free. So the attraction is the ability to have a godlike perception of the world. I'm the one who creates. I'm the one who knows. I'm not dependent on some other person. I'm not dependent on some other meaning that came before me. I have this godlike ability to know and to control the things that I know by what I know. Now, it's important to note that Descartes, even Kant, who comes after him, was not interested in abolishing God, or they were not atheists seeking to wipe God away and say he doesn't exist. But the shift was a mammoth one, because it said that the key to man knowing is actually to step back from the world, to step back from the order that was around him, and to pay attention to himself and to the categories that he understood. Now, Kant himself took a step further than Descartes. Kant said that the way we understand the world is not by looking out at the world to know the world. That world is actually beyond us. We're not able to actually know it. What you know, according to Kant, is whatever your mind tells you to know. So imagine, if you imagine this, close your eyes for a second. Okay, now open your eyes. Imagine when you opened your eyes, what you're seeing is a movie. You're looking out at what you see broadcast through your eyes is a movie. Kant said that our senses take in data from the external world, and our mind, the organization of our mind, takes that data and makes it meaningful. It's not meaningful out there in the world, it's the mind that actually makes it so. So when we get to Kant, we've taken even a step further, away from the real world, away from God who gave it to us and made it, and now it's just the human mind that gives order and meaning to the world. To summarize Descartes, no longer is creation a gift. The world starts with the knower, with man. The man's mind is the thing that imposes meaning on the world. It doesn't discover it, it imposes it. You see the difference? If you're discovering something, you're going out and finding that it exists out there. If you're imposing meaning, you are forcing it on the world. And the third thing is that man's mind then becomes the measure not only of what can be known, but what ought to be known. Man's mind becomes the measure of morality. Now, it's a short step then from Augustine. Well, it's a long step from Augustine to Descartes, but a short step from Descartes to our third thinker. And our third thinker is a man by the name of Michel Foucault. How many of you have heard of Michel Foucault? Not a single person. Oh, well, maybe you might have, all right? And yet, isn't it interesting? Michel Foucault might be the most influential thinker who has had the most influence on you. Because he has had perhaps the most influence on the culture that surrounds you. And yet you don't know about him. That's not your fault. I'm not blaming you for not knowing about him. So, Michel Foucault, following in the footsteps of Friedrich Nietzsche. You all have heard of Nietzsche before, right? A lot more people have heard. I should have made Nietzsche the third thinker. I might as well have. Michel Foucault and Nietzsche, though, you can think of them as bosom buddies, pals. Foucault was just advancing the thought of Nietzsche. So what did he say? Well, remember that Descartes puts the human knower at the center. And Descartes believed that man actually knew the external world. So did Kant, at least to some degree. Man's mind, he said that man's mind influences and shapes the world. But we all have the same knowing mind. It's like I illustrate this like a great sausage grinder. You put the meat in the top, your mind is like the big sausage grinder, and you turn the crank, and neat little sausages come out. Turns out that Kant thought that everybody got their sausage grinder from Acme, like the Roadrunner, remember, in Wile E. Coyote? Everyone has the same sausage grinder, and so the sausages all come out the same way. We all know the same thing because everyone has the same knowing capacity, which is the mind. But you know what Nietzsche did? He just simply said, nuh-uh. If man is at the center of everything and he knows the world on his own categories, Nietzsche just took one step more. He said, we don't all know the world the same way. Who would ever think that? I mean, look at the people in this room. Do you all know the world the same way? Do you all have the same interests? Do you all have the same tastes? Do you like the same things? Are you interested in the same things? Do you value the same things? You know, the answer to that is, of course, no. And so Nietzsche was saying something patently obvious, that if knowledge depends on the individual, then the individual, instead of being just the same as everyone else, like Kant thought, Nietzsche just said, no, everyone is their own unique individual person that knows in their own way. So the consequence of this was to say that the world does not have any order whatsoever. It does not have any order in and of itself. God did not create it. He did not order it. It exists alone, without any order at all. The notion of creation is lost entirely. Instead, man is the creator. Meaning that everything that is meaningful in the world is simply determined by him. What he desires, what he thinks is important. Michel Foucault also said that meaning is person dependent. It means simply that what you find meaningful, you may not. And what you find meaningful, you may not. And that means that meaning is not something out there in the world that I must conform my ideas to. Meaning is just simply something that I find meaningful. And suddenly we're now at that place where, like our culture, languishing, beauty is simply in the eye of the beholder. And everyone perceives something different to be beautiful. And truth, rather than something that is discovered, is something that is imposed. That's why, of course, Michel Foucault is known as one of the fathers of postmodernism. And postmodernism got rid of truth with a capital T. You know what I mean by that? A capital T truth. A notion that truth is something that is true for all of us, something objective outside of us, something that obligates all of us to acknowledge it. That kind of truth can't exist anymore because there's no God to create a world to make it so. And so now we exchange that notion of truth for a lowercase t notion of truth, which is true for me, true for you. Have you ever heard someone say that before? Well, that might be true for you, but it's not true for me. As if that helps anything. Just even think about I won't go off on a tangent. If you really ponder truth and someone says it's true for me but not for you, what has happened? We all know what that means, right? You all know what it means for someone to say, that might be true for you, but it's not true for me. We get the sense of what that means, but we don't understand the consequences of actually uttering that sentence. What's the consequence? What does that person mean who says it's true for you but not for me? What do they mean by truth? What does that even mean? Yes?
Truth goes from objective to subjective.
Yes, exactly right. And what happens when truth goes from objective to subjective? What happens to truth?
It ceases from being true.
Yes, all you're left with then is opinion, right? Have you ever tried to argue with someone who has a very strong opinion, but doesn't feel like there's any need to reason about it? What happens usually when you talk with someone like that?
They get offended.
They get offended, right? And they get offended, and usually if there's two people talking, the volume tends to go up, right? Because all you're left with, if you can't persuade someone of something, and that's of course what it means for something to be true outside of you, right? You can point to that thing together, and you may disagree about it, but you can continue to look at it, you can continue to argue about it, you can continue to reason about it. But if there is nothing outside of us to reason about, and you're stuck in your own head with your own ideas, and that is all that is true, you can't reason with someone about anything that is different than you. All you can do is shout about it. And that's why Foucault's biggest statement is that truth, the pursuit of truth, is really actually reduced to violence. Foucault said that whenever you hear someone talking about truth, watch out, because what they're doing is trying to force something on you. You see, if there's no external world for me to reason about, for you to reason about, for us to argue about, and all truth is what I think is right, then the only way I can make other people do what I want is by forcing them. Have you ever wondered why it is that in our particular, we've been through a really crazy year, haven't we? Protests galore. Peaceful protests, right? Exactly. I've seen a lot of peaceful protests wherein people shout down the people that oppose them. And that's because in our day, the mob is the arbiter of truth. There is no such thing as a peaceful protest. Peaceful protest insists that you have a message that is compelling, that you are standing up and proclaiming this is what is true, and you should believe it too. That's a peaceful protest. It appeals to truth. A violent protest has already concluded that truth does not exist, and the only way to make people do what you want them to do is to burn their house down, to threaten them with violence. So they will do what you want them to do. So we're back at the beginning then, right? What's the consequence of this loss of truth? Of course, it means that the individual is completely free. I am free to decide whatever the meaning of my life is. I can decide whether I am a man or a woman or some other gender. I can decide whatever it is that I like, whether that be food or entertainment. I can decide. There are no limits to what I can decide for myself. But do you see that the meaning in that particular circumstance, that particular knower, is not genuine meaning? It's the most, Augustine would have looked at that and said, that is not freedom. That is the most abject slavery an individual can endure. Being cut off from the world and being trapped in their own lawless desires. It's not freedom. It's abject slavery. Do you see that? Freedom is about living into your potential in the world that God made, to actually growing up into maturity, leaving behind childish things and growing up into maturity. It's learning to love olives. So here's my exhortation for you at the conclusion of this rather wild and rambling story. I know that you're being raised to know the true God who made all things. But what I also know is that your culture, the culture that you live in, is lying to you about what you've been given. If you're honest with me, you are tempted to think that that gift is somehow limiting. And it is limiting. But here's the last image I want to leave you with. How many of you play a musical instrument? Good. Then you will all understand this. Music is all about limits. Isn't it? That's what makes it so challenging. There's a difference between an F and a G. And if you're playing a violin, there's a position for your hand to be in the right place to create the right sound, and there's a place for it to be to create the wrong sound. And what makes music so hard is the discipline of actually mastering that, isn't it? I played the piano growing up. When I was 14, I used to practice 4 hours a day for a year and a half because I wanted to be a concert pianist. The thing that was so challenging was trying to get my fingers to do the things that the composer wanted them to do. Chopin's etudes are incredibly challenging and difficult. And it was so hard to get my fingers to do them. That is what discipline is all about. Limits lead to freedom. If you ever watch a great sports star, say like Michael Jordan, you probably don't remember him, but he was a great basketball player of yesteryear, famous. Or Itzhak Perlman on the violin. No one ever listens to Itzhak Perlman play the violin and think, oh, poor man, such a slave he is. No one saw Michael Jordan play basketball and say, the guy is just weighed down by all of the discipline and slavery to all the skills that he has had to master. He's a slave. It looks like it is. Itzhak Perlman, Michael Jordan were some of the most free human beings that you can imagine when they play their instrument or set foot on the court. And it's because they had been mastered by limits. That's the legacy of Augustine. The world is a gift, and it's possible to become excellent at mastering the world and fitting in it such that we are not slaves, but free men and women. That's what your education that you're receiving is all about. I get to teach college students who are on the other side. You're headed there. But the thing I really want you to recognize this morning is just how much you have been given. And I really want to challenge you to lean into limits. Don't see them as hindering you. See them as Augustine would have had understood them and as he would exhort you. See them as paths to success. See them as roads to freedom. See them as the journey to maturity. Because the world around you is languishing in stupidity, imbecility, and immaturity. Because they're unwilling to receive the gift that God has given in the world that he has made. That's your inheritance. Cherish every time you're wrong about something. Because when you're wrong, you also have the possibility of what? Being right. Right? Most people don't actually cherish the fact that they can be proven wrong. But the other side of knowing that you're wrong is that it's possible then to know what is right, to know what is true. That is a tremendous gift. Do not despise it. I'm going to be talking at chapel tomorrow, and I will just whet your appetite for tomorrow. I want to talk to you about the relationship between pain and joy. How many of you like pain? No hands. How many of you like joy? Yes, everyone loves to be joyful, to rejoice, and to be happy about things, but no one likes pain. But here's the deal. You can't have one without the other. You've always heard it said, no pain, no gain, right? So what I'm going to exhort you tomorrow, and pay attention because we'll talk about it. Wait for it, for it's coming. In the immortal words of Sean Spencer, wait for it. Right? Okay, here it is. You will never learn to really truly have joy in your life until you're willing to embrace pain. You can't have one without the other. And that comes from the fact that God imposes limits on us in order to grow us up into maturity. And the key for you is to learn to embrace that, to enjoy it, to embrace it, to welcome it rather than to try to flee from it, try to run away from it. The sooner you learn that, the faster you will grow into maturity and excellence in whatever it is that you set your hand to. Okay, I've talked for long enough. There's many more things I could say, but I think I've done it. And I did leave a little bit of time, actually, to talk about any of this madness that I've been talking about with you. Any questions you want to ask, and I really would love to just hear what you think. Does what I said make sense to you? Any questions at all? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, sir.
What would you think the connection between Descartes' thinking on cogito ergo sum and pride would be?
And what?
Pride.
Pride. That's a great question, but I want you to answer it first, and then I'll answer it. What do you think?
I think he was like the idea back then for most of the rationalist movement was driven by pride, and that man is God. And so that pridefulness kind of led into that assumption that cogito.
Yes. Yeah, one of the interesting things about that notion of pride, and I think you're absolutely right, it's a false promise, right? It looks like we're getting more. That's why men are attracted to it. It's a heady idea that we can be God, like God, and be God. But the problem with that is that the result of Descartes and Kant and the whole modern project is to actually remove the possibility of meaning from the world. You see that when we get to the final conclusion that we've traced. The world actually loses its meaning. This is one of the things that Father Capon says in his book, The Great Supper. How many of you have ever read The Supper of the Lamb? How many of you have heard of it, read it? So some of you have. Great, excellent. Really good. I strongly commend that. It is a wonderful, rhapsodic meditation, not just on food, but on theology as well. But one of the things that he says in there is that he has this wonderful saying at the end of the second chapter where he says, one real thing is closer to God than all the diagrams of the world. What he means by that is, a real thing is what God made it to be, like an onion. The onion has an existence. It sits there, not dependent on you. It's an onion whether you like it or not. God made it to be so, right? But what Father Capon says is we're tempted, like Descartes was in his pride, to say that an onion isn't what it is, but it's what it can be made to mean to me. It's what I think it is. And so rather than actually paying attention to the onion itself, we impose our own meanings on it. That's what pride is all about. It's imposing our own meaning on the world rather than receiving the meaning that God has given. And what Father Capon says, of course, that's what idolatry is. It's rejecting the world for what God has made it to be and making it into an idol, in our own making. But the thing that I think he does that's so interesting there is he says it's not only an insult to God to not worship him, but worship the creature, but it's also an insult to true things. And he uses the example of the golden calf, right, that Israel made. He said the golden calf, there's nothing wrong with a golden calf. It's a cow. But he says it went begging the moment Israel said, this is the God that delivered us out of the land of Egypt. It was a cow, not God. And by setting it up to be God, what they couldn't see they were doing was actually destroying the meaning of a cow. They were insulting God and insulting the things that he had made. That's always what idolatry does. It's an insult to God, but it also removes the meaning of the world that he gave us. That's extraordinarily important. Excellent, excellent question. Any other questions or thoughts? Anyone? Okay, so I'm going to tell you one final thing then that I think you'll enjoy. One of the effects that we've seen that I talked about with regard to Michel Foucault at the end, the consequence of thinking that meaning is made up by you and imposed on the world, is that you're actually cut off. Part of the consequence of idolatry is being cut off from the world. Everyone that you know, everything that you know is not them. It's what you make them to be, what you think them to be, what you impose your meaning on them makes them. That sets you free, but it also sets you free of them, but it may also makes you incredibly alone. And this has dramatic impact, guess on what? Yes? Yes, it makes people depressed, right? But it has a tremendous impact on marriage itself. There's lots of impact. We could just go on and enumerate the different ways. But male and female relationships, the difference between boys and girls. We have raised a generation of people who are we're at this kind of weird paradox. You've all watched, I'm sure, chick flicks where you've seen that even in our day, there are movies that portray the desire to be loved by somebody, to be loved for who I am. We still believe that, but we're trapped in this reality that actually says that I desire for someone to love me for who I am. But of course, we believe a reality that who that other person is exactly what I want them to be, what I am making them to be. And so we have this weird paradox on the one hand, where people still have this great desire. They still have this, they think on the one hand that marriage as an institution is for the dogs. Because why would you want to, connect yourself to the same person for the rest of your life? That is cutting off all your options and just planting yourself with one person. And everyone doesn't want that. That's the limitation of freedom. Why would we want to do that? And on the other hand, everyone wants to be loved and cherished for who they are. And so we've raised a culture now of people around you. I'm teaching a class right now to high school. How many of you are in high school? Okay, great. I should have specified more, like upper high school, juniors and seniors. This is what I'm teaching. You don't need to raise your hands, but who I'm teaching. I'm teaching Nancy Pearcey's book, Love Thy Body. And it's all about the sexual revolution and its impact on our culture. And it's just fascinating to see where this has left us. We now are in a culture where sex is so free, anybody can have it with anybody. And the consequence of that, of me getting what I want, is that people don't know how to have relationships anymore. Because having a relationship actually means that I have to pay attention to another person. I have to sacrifice what I want in order to receive another person who is intrusive into my life. Remember that God made woman out of the side of man. He had to create a gaping hole, take a rib out to make a woman, and then give her back to Adam. And there's a very important reason that a woman comes from a wound in a man's side. Because when a woman is given back to a man, she is given back as a wound to him, a helper who also is called as a faithful friend to wound him. But how can you wound somebody, or how can you be committed to someone like that when all you're after is what satisfies your own meaning, your own desire, your own lusts? Relationships are impossible. So again, we have this crazy paradox that when you reject the world, when you reject other people that you have to know and sacrifice yourself for, you get away from that and you're free to do whatever you want, to make up meaning however you want. What you end up losing is the world. You lose other people. You lose the intrusion that they make on your life to make you a better person. And that's why relationships are in such a state of disarray in our culture. Because we're trapped. We've cut ourselves off from the possibility of meaning, in that sense, that meaning outside of myself. So you should be absolutely ecstatic about the fact that you are being trained to know the world that God made. God made it for you, to delight you, to teach you about him, to grow you up from being a boy and a girl to being young men and young women who are mature. He made it so that the delights of your heart could be satisfied, not so that they could be hindered. Hold on to that and do not let it go. It's the source of your freedom. Don't sell it out like Esau did for a mess of pottage. Because the world around you is languishing in slavery, and they think it's freedom. All right. Thank you for having me come talk with you. It's such a pleasure to get to see all of you who I hope maybe I'll have an opportunity to meet you individually as school goes on, as I'm here for a few days. But I've, of course, taught people who have come from your school at New St. Andrews, people whom you know. So it's really wonderful to be here and to see where they came from. I really enjoy that. It's a real pleasure to be able to do that. So thank you for welcoming me and my daughter. I'm looking forward to having an opportunity to get to meet you individually as time will allow. Thank you. Can we pray together? Father, thank you for this opportunity to think about the world that you've given. Father, we acknowledge that the sin of Adam was to seize what you had given and use it for his own purposes. And we've been doing it ever since. Father, we think that it's freedom to get away from you, to cut ourselves off from the world that you've made. And yet your word has shown us that that is abject slavery. I pray for these young men and women who are working so diligently in their education, to know the beauty and the majesty and the splendor of the world that you have made and given to them as a gift. I pray that you would help them to cherish that world as the true gift and inheritance that you have given to them. I pray that you would give them the ability to take delight in submitting to you, the Lord of the world that you have made. And as they love you and seek to understand what you have made, I pray that you would grow them up into maturity, to be wise men and women who are genuinely free and who are mature and able to savor all of the delights that you have in store for them. Pray that you would bless the rest of their day. And I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.